The Galactic Council had called for one of its most important meetings ever. The tension in the galaxy had been rising for months, and everyone knew that the decisions made here could change the future for generations. Delegates from 27 different species arrived at the neutral moon of Arvelus, which was chosen because it belonged to no single civilization. The moon's surface was dotted with domed buildings and glass walkways, designed to hold large gatherings and provide equal status to every representative. Humans had never been the most influential members of the council, but their recent technological contributions had earned them respect, even if some species still looked down on them. The human delegation arrived in their sleek silver ships that reflected the soft light of Arvelos' twin suns. Ambassador Mara Levant led the team, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and calm confidence. She had a reputation for remaining collected even in impossible situations, and this would be her greatest test yet. As she stepped off the ship, she could already sense the tension in the air. Other species were watching the humans carefully, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. It was clear that not everyone was pleased that Earth had been given a seat at the table. Inside the council chamber, the delegates took their seats, and the room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Species with tentacles, wings, scales, and even energy-based forms settled into their assigned spots. Mara noticed the small, almost imperceptible smirks from some of the older civilizations. They had long been the ones to shape galaxy-wide policies, and they viewed humans as newcomers who hadn't earned their place. Yet Mara also noticed nervous glances from species who relied on human technology. Even those who underestimated the humans couldn't ignore the fact that Earth had quickly become a key player in certain areas. The meeting began with standard formalities. The counselor from the Korth Dominion, a large reptilian species known for their blunt diplomacy, took the floor. He immediately set a tense tone by discussing sanctions that would severely affect human colonies. Mara listened carefully, taking note of each point. The humans had anticipated disagreements, but they hadn't expected such open hostility so early in the talks. She remained calm, knowing that any reaction could be used against them. Other species tried to mediate, reminding the Korth Dominion that collaboration was more important than conflict. But the Korth counselor was stubborn, confident that humans could not push back effectively. As the session continued, it became clear that the humans were not taken seriously. Several delegates made dismissive remarks, questioning whether Earth had the experience or wisdom to contribute meaningfully to the Council's decisions. Some even suggested that humans' recent successes were mere luck rather than skill or strategy. Mara maintained a composed face, but inside she was noting each slight. The humans had worked hard to gain recognition, and they would not allow arrogance to override the truth of their accomplishments. Despite the rising tension, Mara tried to steer the conversation toward constructive discussions. She reminded the Council of recent joint missions where humans had successfully solved complex logistical problems, prevented conflicts, and contributed to scientific projects that benefited multiple species. A few delegates nodded in agreement, but others waved her off, claiming that humans were too emotional and unpredictable to be trusted with critical decisions. Mara knew that the perception of humans as impulsive could work both ways. It was true that humans had strong emotions, but it was also true that they had courage, creativity, and the ability to find unconventional solutions. She needed to find a way to show that these traits were strengths, not weaknesses. The room's atmosphere grew more strained as discussions turned to resource allocation and security protocols. Mara noticed that the human delegation was quietly observing the behavior of other species. They had prepared detailed reports on past interactions, vulnerabilities, and strengths, using every piece of data to understand how to approach the negotiations strategically. Humans had never relied solely on diplomacy. They also relied on preparation and adaptability. Mara believed that understanding the other species' motivations could be as powerful as any speech or proposal. Hours passed, and the conversation began to heat up. The Korth Councilor's proposals became increasingly harsh, suggesting measures that could cripple Earth's colonies if the humans didn't comply. Some older species tried to calm the situation, but the Korth Councilor ignored them. It was becoming obvious that words alone would not resolve this conflict. Mara felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. If humans lost control of the situation, the consequences could be catastrophic. At the same time, she knew that showing weakness would only encourage further disrespect. Throughout the session, Mara's team remained composed. They had rehearsed various scenarios, including hostile reactions and attempts to undermine their credibility. The human delegation had trained for every possible outcome, but nothing could completely prepare them for the blatant dismissiveness and condescension they faced. Mara's strategy was simple: stay calm, stay focused, and let the Council see that humans were not easily intimidated. Their patience and resilience would be their greatest weapon by the time the session ended for the day. The humans had made a clear impression, even if some delegates still doubted them. They had demonstrated professionalism, knowledge, and a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the aggression from certain council members. Outside the chamber, whispers spread among the delegates. Some were impressed by the humans' composure, while others were frustrated that their attempts to belittle Earth had failed. Mara knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The following days would require even more careful navigation, as tensions were unlikely to decrease. As the human delegation returned to their quarters on Arvelis, Mara reflected on the day's events. She understood that walking into the council chamber had been only the first step. The real test would be standing firm when provoked and making decisions that protected humanity's interests without escalating conflict unnecessarily. She gathered her team and discussed possible strategies for the upcoming sessions. The key, she emphasized, was to remain calm, assess the situation carefully, and be ready to act decisively if pushed too far. The humans had come a long way to earn a seat at the table, and Mara was determined that no one would take it from them. Meanwhile, in other parts of the galaxy, rumors of the tense meeting spread quickly. Some species speculated about the humans' capabilities and whether they would rise to the challenge. Others mocked them, assuming that Earth's diplomats would be outmaneuvered eventually. Mara ignored the noise outside. She knew that influence was not about public opinion but about actions and results. The humans had prepared for this moment for years, and they were not about to let arrogance or prejudice derail their mission. The first day at the council ended with no resolutions, only mounting tension. Mara understood that patience and strategy were essential. She also knew that humans had a unique advantage: their ability to think differently, to see solutions where others saw obstacles. While some delegates underestimated humanity, Mara saw opportunity. The humans were small in number compared to other species, but their impact could be enormous if they played their cards right. The galaxy was about to learn that being underestimated could be humanity's greatest strength. The second day of the Galactic Council meeting was already charged with tension when the human delegation entered the chamber. Unlike the first day, when the discussions had been formal and carefully measured, this session promised confrontation. The humans could sense the growing impatience and arrogance of certain species, and Mara Levant felt the weight of every eye in the room. Some delegates leaned back in their seats, clearly expecting the humans to falter. Others whispered among themselves, curious to see whether Earth's representatives would remain composed under pressure. The council chamber, which had seemed orderly the day before, now felt like a battlefield where every word carried immense weight. The session began with formal addresses, but it quickly escalated when the senior counselor of the Korth Dominion rose to speak. His reptilian features were sharp and intimidating, and his voice carried the kind of authority that demanded attention. He wasted no time criticizing the human delegation, accusing them of recklessness and emotional decisions. The words were meant to provoke, to unsettle the humans and make them doubt their place at the table. Mara listened without interrupting, her face calm and her posture steady. She had anticipated attacks, but the bluntness of the accusation still carried a sting. Her mind worked quickly, weighing every possible response. She understood that any hint of anger or defensiveness could be used against humanity, making them appear as the emotional species the counselor claimed they were. As the Korth counselor continued, he suggested punitive measures that would greatly limit human influence in council affairs. His tone was not just condescending but almost dismissive, as though humans were nothing more than children who had wandered into matters far beyond their comprehension. Some delegates nodded silently, seemingly agreeing with his assessment, while others shifted uneasily in their seats, unsure how to respond. Mara could feel the tension rising not only within the chamber but among her own team. They had prepared for every scenario, but the directness and hostility of this attack required more than preparation. It required presence, confidence, and the willingness to act decisively. For hours, the council engaged in heated debate. Human proposals were met with interruptions and derisive comments. At one point, a representative from an older species openly questioned whether humans had the intelligence and foresight to contribute to critical decisions. It was clear that many in the room assumed that Earth's delegation would simply retreat, or accept whatever terms were forced upon them. Mara remained silent for most of the session, carefully listening, analyzing, and calculating. Every insult and dismissal was a piece of the puzzle she had to navigate. She knew that patience was important, but she also recognized that there was a limit to how much disrespect humanity could tolerate without consequences. As the tension reached its peak, Mara realized that words alone would not resolve the situation. The Korth counselor's arrogance and the dismissive attitude of other delegates made it obvious that humanity was being tested in a way no other species had been tested before. The humans had contributed significantly to council operations, yet here they were being belittled and ignored. Mara glanced at her team and saw the mix of determination and frustration in their eyes. They knew what was at stake, and they understood that maintaining dignity and authority required more than polite negotiation. It required action. Then, without warning, Mara did something that stunned the entire chamber. She closed her datapad with a quiet snap, stood, and addressed the room in a calm but firm voice. She reminded everyone that if humanity's presence was considered a burden, then the human delegation would not force themselves to remain. Her words were measured but carried immense weight. There was no anger, no shouting, just a clear statement of intent. One by one, the human representatives rose, standing together as a single, unyielding unit. Without another word, they began to walk towards the exit. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the vast chamber, a steady reminder that humans had reached the limit of tolerance for disrespect. The reaction in the council chamber was immediate and varied. Some delegates laughed, assuming it was a bluff and that the humans would return once the court counselor had finished speaking. Others were frozen in disbelief, unsure how to respond. The silence that followed was heavier than any debate, filled with the realization that humans had never acted like this before. No species had ever walked out of a council session in the history of the galaxy. The walkout was not just a protest, it was a statement that humanity demanded respect and would not tolerate humiliation, regardless of the consequences. As the humans exited the chamber, whispers filled the room. Some delegates tried to minimize the moment, claiming that Earth's representatives would come back once they had cooled off. Others began to question whether underestimating humanity had been a mistake. The walkout forced every species present to reevaluate what they thought they knew about humans. They had assumed compliance, predictability, and a willingness to be pushed around. The reality was far different. Humans were not easily intimidated. Their willingness to take a stand shocked even the most seasoned diplomats outside the chamber. The humans gathered briefly in a quiet corridor. Mara addressed her team, emphasizing that their actions were deliberate and controlled. This was not impulsive behavior. It was a strategic decision to assert humanity's position. Every member of the delegation understood the stakes. By walking out, they had disrupted the established norms of the council and demonstrated that Earth could not be ignored. Mara's leadership was calm and deliberate, reinforcing the idea that humans were capable of both restraint and decisive action. The effects of the walkout rippled quickly beyond the council chamber. Within hours, communications across council channels began to buzz with speculation and concern. Analysts from various species attempted to predict human behavior, many underestimating the significance of the gesture. Yet some began to realize that the humans were not merely protesting, they were demonstrating power through absence. By removing themselves from the situation, they created a void that no other species could easily fill. It was a subtle but profound way of showing that humanity had become integral to the Council's operations, and that ignoring them came with serious consequences. Meanwhile, the humans remained composed and focused. Mara instructed her team to monitor reactions, gather intelligence, and prepare for the next steps. The delegation knew that they had made a bold move, one that could either force the Council to reconsider their approach or escalate tensions further. The walkout had succeeded in commanding attention and respect, but it also required careful management to ensure that it did not spiral into open conflict. Humans had always relied on a combination of strategy, courage, and adaptability, and this situation was no different. Every decision from this point on would be critical. As the day progressed, the Council began to understand the significance of what had just happened. The walkout was not a simple protest. It was a calculated demonstration of authority and self. Delegates began to realize that humans were not only capable of contributing meaningfully to council decisions, but were also willing to assert their position in ways that others could not predict. The psychological impact of the walkout was immense. Species that had underestimated humanity now had to acknowledge that Earth could act independently and decisively, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. By the evening, discussions within the council shifted subtly. Delegates who had mocked the humans earlier began to reconsider their positions. Analysts and advisors debated the potential consequences of ignoring Earth's delegation, realizing that human absence could disrupt operations and initiatives on which multiple species relied. The walkout had created a ripple effect, forcing the Council to reckon with the reality that humans were far more influential than many had assumed. Mara and her team observed the reactions carefully, understanding that the next sessions would be critical in shaping the future of interstellar diplomacy. The walkout of the human delegation marked a turning point. It was not just a response to insults and dismissive behavior. It was a demonstration that humanity would not be marginalized. The act carried a clear message: respect and equality were non-negotiable, and underestimating humans was a mistake. Mara knew that the Council's perception of Earth had changed irrevocably. What had begun as a standard diplomatic session had evolved into a profound lesson for every species present. Humans were unpredictable, capable, and unafraid to assert themselves when necessary. This bold step would shape the course of the negotiations, setting the stage for consequences that no one in the galaxy had anticipated. The moment the human delegation walked out of the council chamber, the galaxy didn't immediately realize the magnitude of what had just happened. At first, many species assumed the humans would return within hours, or perhaps a day at most. After all, humans were small in number compared to the other species in the council, and their absence seemed like it could be easily absorbed. But within the first few hours it became clear that this was no ordinary protest. Human ships began withdrawing from every council-shared patrol route, research station, and diplomatic post. These were not random movements. They were precise, coordinated, and immediate. The other species had relied on human ingenuity, discipline, and effort in ways they hadn't fully appreciated, and suddenly, those contributions were gone. Trade systems that depended on Earth's technology started showing strain. Supplies of essential components and materials slowed, and in some cases, completely halted. Certain sectors experienced technical glitches in navigation and communication arrays. Smaller species, who had once considered human protection optional, suddenly found themselves exposed to threats they could not defend against. Mara Levant and her team were fully aware of the ripple effects. Their goal was not to create chaos, but to demonstrate that humanity was a critical part of the Council's ecosystem, and that ignoring them had real consequences. Every ship that left, every station that went offline, was part of a carefully calculated plan to show the galaxy just how integrated humans had become. Inside the Council, panic began to spread. Initially, delegates tried to dismiss the issue, calling the human absence a temporary inconvenience. Some even suggested that humans would be forced back once shortages and system failures became severe. But as hours turned into a full day, it became apparent that the humans were serious. Analysts quickly discovered that humans had been quietly maintaining dozens of crucial shared systems. These included emergency medical grids, environmental regulators on contested planets, asteroid deflection programs, and logistical networks that ensured trade and safety across multiple sectors. The absence of human oversight caused malfunctions and delays, some minor but others serious enough to threaten lives and destabilize regions. The Council scrambled to address these failures, but no species had the knowledge, experience, or coordination to replace what humans had been providing. Attempts to patch systems were slow, inefficient, and often caused more problems than they solved. Minor conflicts flared in areas previously stabilized by human intervention. Supply chains broke down, leaving planets with shortages of food, medical supplies, and critical technology. Pirates and hostile factions began exploiting the gaps in human protection, and the Council had no clear way to stop them. Mara watched as the chaos spread, knowing that the humans had anticipated every one of these consequences. This was a demonstration, not a threat. The galaxy was learning, sometimes painfully, the value of the species they had underestimated. Within the first 24 hours, the Council's internal communications were filled with urgency and confusion. Advisors scrambled to contact every available fleet and station, trying to find replacements for human engineers and diplomats. Even seasoned counselors admitted privately that they had underestimated how much human expertise had been integrated into essential operations. Every species that had dismissed humans was forced to confront the reality that Earth was not merely a participant in interstellar politics, but a backbone of many critical systems. The sudden vacuum created by their walkout revealed a truth that had been invisible until humans removed themselves from the equation. Meanwhile, the humans remained remarkably composed. Mara Levant's team worked methodically, observing the galaxy's reactions without intervention. They were careful not to exacerbate the situation beyond what was necessary to make the point. Each move had been calculated to show the Council the real consequences of dismissing humanity. Even as communication channels went dark and Council systems faltered, humans were not acting impulsively. They understood that demonstrating influence without escalating into open conflict was the key to commanding respect. Their withdrawal was a lesson in leverage, showing that absence could be as powerful as presence when executed strategically. The impact of the human walkout reached unexpected areas. Planets that relied on human disaster response teams experienced delays in responding to environmental crises. Flooding, resource shortages, and fires affected colonies that had previously been considered low risk due to human support. Some smaller species that had counted on human diplomacy to mediate border disputes suddenly faced confrontations they were ill-equipped to handle. Even advanced civilizations found that projects requiring precise human technological contributions stalled. The galaxy realized that humans had quietly taken responsibility for tasks that no other species wanted, and they had done so exceptionally well. Their absence made it clear just how essential those contributions had been. As the Council struggled to regain control, the mood shifted from frustration to fear. Species that had mocked humans began to reconsider their assumptions. Analysts calculated the economic and political damage caused by the withdrawal, and the numbers were staggering. Infrastructure, trade, defense, and scientific collaboration had all been deeply dependent on humans, more than anyone had realized. This was a critical turning point. What had seemed like a minor walkout had revealed the extent to which humanity had become a central pillar in the galaxy's interdependent systems. The Council finally understood that underestimating humans had consequences far beyond personal insult. It affected entire civilizations. Mara Levant's strategy became increasingly evident as more systems failed. Humans were proving a point without engaging in aggression or overt hostility. They were showing that competence, reliability, and calm decisiveness could be more powerful than intimidation, and that neglecting these qualities could be disastrous. Delegates who had previously doubted humanity began to take notice. Some species quietly reached out through informal channels, asking for clarification or assistance, but Mara and her team maintained their disciplined distance. The humans had the upper hand. They had created a scenario in which the galaxy depended on them. even as the Council had tried to dismiss their importance by the second day of human absence. The galaxy had entered a state of crisis. Critical Council operations faltered, regional security measures weakened, and trade networks slowed to a crawl. Delegates faced mounting pressure from their own people to resolve the situation quickly. The full extent of human integration became undeniable. Mara observed from a neutral point, noting reactions across the Council. Some delegates appeared genuinely shocked, others frustrated, and a few embarrassed by their previous The humans had effectively turned a simple walkout into a demonstration of indispensable value, and the Council's realization was both immediate and humbling. Throughout this period, the humans remained calm, patient, and focused. They were not there to punish, nor to dominate. They were there to make a single point: respect, equality, and recognition of contributions mattered. Every system that faltered, every delay in trade or aid, reinforced the lesson. Humanity had quietly shouldered responsibilities for decades, often unnoticed and underappreciated. The sudden withdrawal revealed the truth in the most dramatic way possible. The galaxy learned that humans were not just participants but essential collaborators, and that ignoring them came at a cost. By the end of the third day, the consequences of the human walkout were undeniable. Council systems were failing, smaller species were vulnerable, and larger species were scrambling to stabilize regions previously managed by humans. The absence of the human delegation had forced the galaxy to confront a stark reality. Human contributions were critical, and underestimating them had been a profound mistake. The Council could no longer ignore it. Mara and her team had achieved their objective. The galaxy now knew that humans were not just a new species at the table, they were an indispensable force, capable of reshaping the balance of interstellar diplomacy with a single, decisive action. As the human delegation remained absent from the Galactic Council, the full extent of their contributions began to become painfully clear. The systems that had faltered during the initial withdrawal revealed a truth that many species had never truly understood. Humans were not just participants in Council operations. They were the hidden backbone of countless initiatives. Tasks that had seemed minor or routine had actually been managed with unmatched skill, precision, and dedication. The failure of these systems forced the galaxy to confront the reality that Earth had quietly held together a network of functions that affected millions of lives across dozens of civilizations. Analysts from multiple species began scouring records and operational logs, initially trying to understand why things had gone wrong so quickly. It quickly became evident that humans had been responsible for maintaining dozens of critical infrastructures, communication networks between sectors, essential for trade, diplomacy, and security, had relied heavily on human programming and oversight. Advanced environmental regulators on contested planets, asteroid deflection projects, and emergency response systems all had depended on human ingenuity and meticulous attention to detail. The scale of human involvement stunned every counselor who had previously dismissed Earth's significance. As word spread, species that had been vocal critics of humanity now faced a profound sense of embarrassment. The Fourth Dominion, in particular, realized that their assumptions about human recklessness had been disastrously wrong. Their punitive proposals had been based on the belief that humans would comply without resistance. Yet the opposite had occurred. Not only had humans refused to participate under conditions of disrespect, but their absence had also demonstrated how integral they were to the galaxy's stability. Even other major civilizations that had underestimated humanity were now forced to reassess their positions, recognizing that human competence was unmatched in many critical areas. That the failure of human-managed systems revealed the extent to which other species had relied on humans without even realizing it. Smaller civilizations that had counted on human protection found themselves exposed to threats, and border disputes flared where humans had previously mediated successfully. Trade networks that had seemed self-sufficient suddenly slowed to a crawl, leaving colonies and planets with shortages of food, medicine, and vital technology. Pirates and opportunistic factions began exploiting vulnerabilities, highlighting the precise ways in which human oversight had prevented chaos for decades. The galaxy could no longer ignore the hidden labor and strategic thinking that humans had provided. Council meetings became tense as delegates attempted to coordinate replacements for human operations. Specialists from multiple species worked around the clock, but the gaps were enormous. Many of the systems humans had managed were too complex or too specialized for other species to quickly assume responsibility. Even advanced civilizations faced difficulties replicating Earth's contributions. The realization settled in: humans had not just volunteered for small tasks, but had assumed responsibilities no other species wanted, and they had done so better than anyone else. The galaxy was witnessing the consequences of underestimating one of its youngest members within the Council. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Conversations that had previously been about human compliance now focused on how to manage without them. Private discussions revealed that human knowledge and leadership were far deeper than anyone had imagined. The very infrastructure of interstellar cooperation had been quietly sustained by humans for decades. Delegates began to acknowledge the irony. The species they had mocked, dismissed, or underestimated had been holding together systems that ensured the safety, efficiency, and survival of multiple civilizations. This recognition sparked both fear and admiration. Some of the most striking revelations came from the analysis of emergency response networks. Humans had long maintained a rapid response fleet capable of addressing natural disasters, pirate attacks, and sudden political crises across many sectors. Their coordination was precise, their speed unmatched, and their ability to anticipate problems had prevented countless conflicts. Without humans, many regions were left vulnerable, and the galaxy suddenly realized just how much had depended on Earth's foresight and willingness to act. The absence of humans transformed minor disruptions into serious crises, and species that had once underestimated them now scrambled to fill the void. Mara Levant and her team observed all of this with calculated patience. They had anticipated that the Council would eventually notice the scale of human contributions, but the speed and intensity of the realization exceeded expectations. Every system failure, trade disruption, and political complications served as a lesson to the galaxy. Humans were indispensable. Their withdrawal had created a vacuum that no other species could fill quickly or efficiently. The demonstration was clear, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Humans had not just walked away, they had exposed the fragility of interstellar reliance on assumptions and underestimation. As more species became aware of the consequences, informal communications began to spread across the galaxy. Leaders and advisors openly admitted that they had misjudged humanity's significance. Some smaller civilizations, previously indifferent to Earth's influence, now expressed urgency in re-establishing contact and cooperation. The Fourth Dominion and other major powers were forced to consider diplomatic overtures that they had previously rejected. Humanity's absence had transformed from a symbolic protest into a strategic leverage point, reshaping the balance of influence within the Council and across the wider galaxy. Even the Council itself had to reconsider its previous decisions. Reports indicated that decades of quiet human contributions had been taken for granted. Infrastructure, trade, defense, and environmental stability all had been quietly maintained by humans. The realization was humbling. For years, the galaxy had relied on Earth without acknowledgement, and the consequences of ignoring this had now become painfully obvious. What had begun as a simple walkout had evolved into a profound revelation about competence, reliability, and the unseen labor that humans had undertaken. By the end of the period of absence, the galaxy's perspective on humans had changed fundamentally. No longer were they seen as impulsive, emotional, or inexperienced. Instead, humans were recognized as precise, reliable, and capable of handling responsibilities that far exceeded their apparent influence. The Council, along with other species, had been forced to acknowledge that underestimating humanity had been a serious miscalculation. Mara Levant's calculated withdrawal had accomplished what decades of diplomacy could not. It made the galaxy fully aware of Earth's essential role. The lesson was clear and undeniable. Humanity had quietly managed, maintained, and protected the galaxy's critical systems while being underestimated, ignored, or dismissed. The absence of humans had revealed both the fragility of interstellar operations and the extraordinary capabilities of Earth's species. As systems gradually began to show strain and crises emerged across multiple sectors, the galaxy realized that respecting humans was not optional, it was essential. The walkout had not just made a statement, it had changed perceptions, forced accountability, and ensured that the value of humanity could no longer be questioned. The Council, the major powers, and even the smallest civilizations now understood that Earth was not merely a participant in interstellar affairs but a crucial force without which the galaxy could not function smoothly. The consequences of humanity's absence had reached a tipping point. By the sixth day, the Galactic Council and the wider galaxy were in crisis. Critical systems continued to falter, trade networks remained disrupted, and diplomatic tensions were escalating in multiple regions. Smaller civilizations, previously protected or guided by humans, faced immediate threats from opportunistic factions and pirates. Even some of the most advanced species were struggling to maintain balance in sectors that had long relied on human coordination. It was now undeniable. Humanity's contributions had been indispensable, and their absence had exposed just how reliant the galaxy had been on them. Within the Council, panic and urgency replaced the usual formalities. Delegates who had dismissed or mocked humans earlier were forced to confront them. The Fourth Dominion, in particular, felt embarrassed and alarmed, realizing that their aggressive proposals had been both premature and foolish. Other species scrambled to coordinate replacement teams, but it quickly became clear that no combination of available resources could replicate the efficiency, foresight, and adaptability humans had provided. The Council faced a stark choice: risk further chaos or reach out to humanity with a formal acknowledgement of their value and an urgent appeal for cooperation. Mara Levant and her team remained calm, observing the galaxy's desperate maneuvers without intervening. Their absence had demonstrated humanity's importance in a way no speech or negotiation ever could. Every system failure, trade disruption, and diplomatic complications served as a lesson. Humans were central, not peripheral, to interstellar stability. Mara understood that the galaxy was finally ready to acknowledge this truth, but she also knew that any return needed to be on humanity's terms. Respect, equality, and recognition of their contributions were non-negotiable. As the Council debated internally, intelligence reports confirmed the widespread impact of human absence. Transportation networks were breaking down in multiple sectors, and colonies faced shortages of essential supplies. Environmental regulators on fragile planets were failing, causing local disasters that could have long-term consequences. Even scientific research initiatives were stalling, as human coordination had been critical for data collection, analysis, and interspecies collaboration. The galaxy was learning, in real time, the true scope of Earth's influence. The lesson was unavoidable. Humans had been quietly sustaining systems that no other species had wanted to manage, and they had done so with unmatched skill. The turning point came when the Council realized that piecemeal attempts to replace humans were not only insufficient but also creating additional risks. Task forces from multiple species were being overwhelmed, and coordination was failing across critical projects. At that moment, the Council unanimously recognized that they had underestimated humanity. A formal apology and a request for immediate human participation were drafted and approved, an unprecedented move in the history of interstellar diplomacy. The document acknowledged past mistakes, praised human contributions, and requested their return under terms that would ensure respect and equal voice. It was clear that the galaxy had learned the hard way that ignoring Earth was no longer an option. When Mara Levant received the Council's communication, she gathered her delegation. She read the message carefully, noting both the apology and the urgency. Humans had proven their point. The galaxy now understood their value. Yet, Mara also recognized that returning immediately without conditions would undermine the lesson they had delivered. The delegation formulated a response that emphasized cooperation, but only under clear terms: mutual respect, recognition of humanity's sovereignty, and equality in decision-making. They were not simply returning to solve problems for others. They were returning as equal partners, having established the undeniable importance of their contributions. The return of the human delegation to the Council chamber was met with astonishment. Every delegate stood in respectful silence, aware that they had misjudged the species that had walked out only days earlier. The human presence commanded attention, not through threats or force, but through demonstrated competence, strategy, and patience. Mara Levant's calm demeanor reinforced the point. Humans had the power to influence events without raising their voices or using intimidation. The lessons of absence had been internalized by the galaxy, and respect was now genuine and universal. As discussions resumed, the atmosphere in the chamber had changed completely. Delegates approached negotiations with humility, aware that their previous arrogance had been a mistake. Mara guided the human delegation with strategic clarity, ensuring that their contributions were recognized and their conditions respected. The Council agreed to allocate responsibility in ways that acknowledged human expertise, and systems that had faltered were gradually stabilized with Earth's coordination. This time, collaboration was built on mutual respect rather than assumptions or dismissive attitudes. Humanity had demonstrated that their presence was not just helpful but essential, and the galaxy had learned to value them accordingly. Outside the Council, the broader galaxy experienced immediate improvements as human-led coordination resumed. Trade networks became efficient again, diplomatic tensions cooled under human mediation, and smaller civilizations regained protection and guidance. Environmental monitoring systems resumed functioning, preventing disasters and stabilizing fragile ecosystems. Scientists, engineers, and logisticians across multiple sectors resumed their projects with human support, leading to rapid recovery. The galaxy had witnessed the tangible consequences of underestimating Earth, and now it benefited from the return of the species that had been quietly sustaining it all along. The episode left a lasting impression on the Council and the wider interstellar community. No species would ever again take humanity for granted. The lesson was clear: competence, reliability, and strategic patience could be more influential than raw power or intimidation. Humanity had proven that absence could be as powerful as presence, and that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned and maintained. The walkout had reshaped perceptions, established Earth's essential role, and ensured that the galaxy would recognize the value of humans for generations to come. For Mara Levant and her delegation, the successful return was not just about stabilizing systems or ensuring cooperation. It was a validation of strategy, patience, and foresight. Humans had demonstrated that their influence was earned through competence and integrity, not through dominance or aggression. The Council had learned the cost of underestimation, and the galaxy had learned the true meaning of partnership with Earth. Humans had walked out. The galaxy had suffered in their absence, and now, through deliberate and controlled action, humanity had ensured that respect, equality, and recognition were firmly established. The final outcome was transformative. The Galactic Council adopted new protocols to ensure that no species, no matter how small or new, would be underestimated again. Collaborative systems were restructured with transparency and accountability. Recognizing the contributions of all civilizations, humanity's approach became a model for strategic diplomacy, showing that sometimes the most effective demonstration of power is restraint, patience, and the ability to make others realize your value without confrontation. The galaxy had endured a dramatic lesson, and the humans had delivered it with clarity, precision, and integrity. By the end of the episode, the galaxy had a renewed respect for Earth and its people. Systems were restored, stability returned, and cooperation resumed on a foundation of mutual recognition. Mara Levant and her delegation had achieved more than simply asserting influence. They had reshaped the dynamics of interstellar relations. The walkout, once a bold act of protest, had become a defining moment in galactic history. The Council and all member species now understood that humanity was not just a participant but a central, indispensable force capable of shaping the future of the galaxy. The lesson would resonate for generations. Underestimate humans at your own peril.